Hello everyone. Today we will introduce English grammatical functions based on our syntax textbook. Every sentence has several parts that play different roles. The first one is the subject. The subject usually refers to the person or thing that performs the action or the topic of the sentence. For example, if my brother wears a green overcoat, my brother is the subject because he is the one wearing the coat. The subject is almost always a noun phrase, and it plays an essential role because every sentence needs a subject to be complete. Understanding the subject helps us see how other parts of the sentence are connected. Now, Minche will explain how we can identify the subject more accurately through grammatical tests.
Actually, identifying the subject depends more on grammatical structure than on meaning. So in the book, we learn 6 syntactic tests to find the subject accurately. First, the subject must be a noun phrase. That includes pronouns like she, he, or they, and even longer phrase. Second, in normal statements, the subject usually appears at the first noun phrase in the sentence. Third, it is obligatory. Without a subject, the sentence becomes ungrammatical. For example, ate dinner is not a complete sentence because the subject is missing. Fourth, the verb must agree with the subject in number and person. For example, my friend likes music, but my friends like music. Fifth, in yes or no question, the subject swaps position with the verb or auxiliary. For example, this teacher is a genius become is this teacher a genius? 6. In a tag question, a pronoun refers back to the subject like this teacher is a genius, isn't she? Where she stands for this teacher. Using this test helps us avoid mistakes when the subject is not the first known phrase. For example, last night the teacher was very merry. Even though last night comes first, it can be removed and the sentence is still complete. But the teacher controls the verb were and is the reference in the tag question, weren't they? Therefore, the teacher is the true subject of the sentence. So the most important point is the subject is identified by structure, not by meaning or topic alone.
The predicator is the verbal element within the predicate that expresses the central action or state of a clause. It serves as the grammatical nucleus of the predicate, indicating what the subject does, experiences, or is. In linguistic terms, the predicator functions as the core of predication, linking the subject to its situation or condition. For example, in the sentence, the cat devoured the rat, the word devoured functions as a predicator. It represents the main action carried out by the subject, the cat, and thus conveys the essential meaning of the entire clause. While the predicate includes every element that provides information about the subject, such as objects, complements, and adverbials, the predicator specifically refers to the main verb that anchors all these components together. In other words, it is a central grammatical unit that defines the type of process expressed in the sentence, whether it is an action, a state, or an event. By distinguishing between the predicate and predicator, we can better understand how verbs function not just as words of action, but as a structural and semantic core of the sentence.
The direct object is a grammatical function typically filled by a noun phrase that receives the action of the verb. It shows what or whom the action directly affects. For example, he and his girlfriend both this computer. This computer is the direct object because it is what was bought. The direct object usually occurs immediately after the verb and cannot be omitted without making the sentence complete. It forms a close relationship with the verb and helps complete the overall meaning of the sentence. Some verbs require a direct object to make sense. Such verbs are called transitive verbs. In contrast, verbs that do not take an object are known as intransitive verbs. Direct objects are closely connected to the verb, and in passive transformation, the direct object of the active sentence becomes the subject or the passive sentence. Therefore, the direct object plays a vital role in showing who or what receives the action, where it occurs in the sentence, and how transitive verbs function in English grammar.
Okay.
I'll talk about how direct objects behave in passive sentences. In an active sentence, the subject performs the action and the direct object receives it. For example, in his girlfriend bought this computer, the subject, his girlfriend, does the action of buying, and this computer is the direct object of that receives it. When we change this sentence into the passive voice, the direct object becomes the subject. So this computer was bought by his girlfriend. Here the original subject moves into a by phrase and the verb changes into a passive verb be plus past participle. This transformation shows a clear change in grammatical function. The direct object of the active sentence becomes the subject of the passive one. Active sentences focus on who does the action, while passive sentences focus on what is done or who experiences the action. Finally, this pattern also helps us identify the direct object in a sentence. If a noun can become a subject when we form passive sentences, then that noun must be the direct object in the active form. And I'm going to talk about transitive and intransitive verbs. First, the transitive verb needs a direct object to complete its meaning. For example, Harold moved the table. Here, the table is the direct object that receives the action. If we remove it and just say Harold moved, the sentence sounds incomplete. On the other hand, an intransitive verb does need a direct object. It can stand alone and still make sense. For instance, Harold moved simply means he changed his position, and that's already a complete idea. Some verbs can actually be both transitive and intransitive, depending on how we use them. For example, move or walk can take an object or not. Jake walked the dog, it is transitive, and Jake walked, it is intransitive. So, to sum up, transitive verbs need an object to complete their meaning, while intransitive verbs do not.
In English sentence, depending on the verb, there are cases in which an indirect object is needed. An indirect object answers the question of to whom, or for what of the situation. The textbook uses the expression goal, receiver, beneficiary to explain indirect object. According to the textbook, we can repair a sentence with indirect objects in various ways. Let's use the sentence we gave the CDs to the boys, for example. We can add to the direct object and make the indirect object of the sentence precede the direct object. A sentence that was originally an ungrammatical sentence we gave the CDs, the boys, can be established by adding to. We can also let the indirect object become the subjects of passive sentences. Notice that the subject of the active sentence again ends up in a biphrase. The direct object stays in place. Here, in the sentence, the CDs were given to the boys by us. The direct objects, rather than the indirect objects, have become the subjects of passive sentences. In this sentence, not only have the direct object of the active sentences become the subjects of passive sentences, but another change has also occurred. The indirect objects have ended up in phrases beginning with to. This would be the end of our presentation, and thank you for listening.
Thank you. Okay, good.